Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today I'm excited to talk to you about all of the books that I read in the month of July. So I had a pretty good reading month. I read 8 books. There were 2 books on my TBR that I didn't get to, and those were The Reformatory by Tanner Dew and Come Tumbling Down by Shauna McGuire. And I did move Come Tumbling Down to my August TBR, so I'm still going to read that. As for The Reformatory, I've pushed that off. That feels like it might be a little bit more of a fall read. It's also quite long, and I had a little bit of a month. There were a couple times I thought I was going to fall into a reading slump, so I decided that I was not going to read anything that I wasn't sure about. So that one's going to get pushed off to fall. So I started out the month really strong, and I read Nona the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. So Nona is the 3rd book in the Locked Tomb series. This is one of my favorite series of all time. Gideon the Ninth is one of my favorite books. And I always find that I have a hard time talking about these books because they are so strange. They are not really science fiction. I would say they're more sci-fantasy. I don't think there's any science in them. Basically, there is a reality where there's a form of magic called necromancy, and there are all these different planets, which they call houses, that all practice a different type of necromancy. And we've been following Harrow, we've been following Gideon, and now we're following Nona in this 3rd book, and I will not spoil anything about that for you if you haven't read any of the other books. Know that each one of these books kind of does a little bit of a reset. They are all very different from each other, and they are all slightly confusing, but I will say that I didn't think that Nona was nearly as confusing as Harrow was. Harrow is something that I would definitely warn you about before you get into it, that it is going to be a challenge to get all the way through. I think Nona made more sense kind of from the beginning, but it still has its challenging moments, and I still at the end had to look up the Wikipedia page on it to make sure that I really understood everything that had happened. But I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4.5 stars. And I am planning to read Electo the Ninth whenever that comes out, which will be the final book in the series. And so far we don't have a release date for that. So I actually have managed to get myself caught up on a series, which for me is a pretty big deal. So Nona took me quite a while to read, probably about a week, which is a long time for a book that isn't really that long. But after that, I picked up another book from my TBR, which is Sorcery of Thorns. I love the cover on this one. And this is by Margaret Rogerson. I actually really enjoyed this book. And I would say if I had to give a recommendation, to be honest, I would say when you read the Harry Potter books, did you always secretly think that Hermione and Draco should have gotten together? Because if you did, this is the book for you. I actually looked up whether or not it was secretly camouflaged Hermione fan fiction, because it felt so much like I was reading about those 2 characters. This book follows Elizabeth, and her love interest in this book is Nathaniel. Nathaniel's a sorcerer. Elizabeth is someone who has grown up inside one of the great libraries of this world. The great libraries are, yes, a place of repository of all the knowledge of the world, but also of all the magic of the world. Magic can be contained in grimoires, which seem to be almost sentient in this book, and they are locked away inside these libraries. And librarians actually have swords and know how to fight demons and all kinds of things. It's not what you're thinking about when you think about a library. Elizabeth, her whole life, has wanted nothing more than to be kind of one of these master librarians. But then something happens before she can be admitted to her apprenticeship, and she finds herself investigating a conspiracy at the highest levels of this world. And of course, falling in love with not Draco. This is a pretty adorable book. Nathaniel is a great love interest. He's very snarky. I personally loved Draco in the books, although he's of course a very morally gray character. Like I said, I don't have any evidence that this is fan fiction, and maybe it's not, but I would say that if that kind of relationship, they would probably call it enemies to lovers, but I would say that they're not really enemies. In this book, just they don't trust each other for about like 3 days. But anyway, it's excellent. It's very good. I would recommend it. I gave it 4 stars, which is a pretty good ranking for me. This is a young adult book. It does not have any spice in it, so if that's something you care about, that's something to know. And yeah, so this was a pretty decent one, and I really enjoyed reading it. So after I read Sorcery of Thorns, I decided that I was going to take the time to read my very first Star Wars novels. I do have a vlog about this experience if you would like to follow along with me. But I did read 2 books that were Star Wars books this month, and the first one is Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. And then I also read The Rising Storm by Cavan Scott. The main question that I was trying to answer with these 2 books was, do I think that the High Republic, this new era of Star Wars that they have created, is a good place for people that haven't read Star Wars before to start? And the answer that I came up with was, no, I do not think this is a good place to start. And I would say primarily that's because these books were filled with way too many characters. I can see the excitement, but I also feel like I can feel the Disney-led, story meetings where they came up with every character and had to put all of them, I feel like, in this first book. There are so many characters to remember. It also doesn't do a very good job describing people. If you care about what all the different races in Star Wars look like, you're going to spend your whole time on Wikipedia trying to figure out what they look like, because they are not very heavily described within the book. There might be a little bit of a description, but then if you're not, somebody who has followed every single piece of Star Wars media, I think you're going to be a little bit confused. The plotline of this book is basically that there is a disaster that has happened, and now the Jedi are trying to stop the effects of this terrible disaster that has happened. And so that was a good idea. I did enjoy the first part of the book. We are introduced to a new enemy. They're called the Nihil, and I would say that, at least in the first book, they're very much kind of like the Anarchy motorcycle gang in space, and I did not find them scary. But yeah, and then I think the second book, I didn't like it as much as the first one, actually. I think the first one was a little bit stronger for me, but both of them felt very much like they were written by comic book writers, which they were. Which is not a slight. It's just that I felt like they were not descriptive enough for me, and I personally felt a little bit bored at parts because it was just a lot of dialogue, not a lot of description, a lot of meetings, that kind of thing. A lot of battle scenes, which admittedly action scenes in books are probably not my favorite thing. I generally kind of skim over them and go, okay, well, that happened. It's just not my favorite part. But so these are kind of a meh for me. I gave them 3 stars. This one is going to rank higher than this one, but unfortunately they are part of the same trilogy. So am I going to finish that trilogy and read the 3rd book? I feel like I should, just so that I don't have another unfinished series, if we want to think of that as a series, even though I think it's kind of not. But overall, this experience was a little bit disappointing and threatened to put me into a reading slump. So 2.5, 3 stars. Wouldn't really recommend them that highly. If you're already a fan of Star Wars books, I would recommend reading them because you probably want to read everything, and they're not bad. They're just a little boring, and that was not what I was hoping for with my first experience with adult Star Wars fiction. So, So then after that, I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot have a reading slump. This is not going to work for me. I went to the library and I picked up a copy of, this was also on my TBR, of Severance by Ling. So I would say that this is a weird book. It's a weird book. It is a post-apocalyptic story about a flu. It's kind of a fungal-based flu that causes a global pandemic where many, many people die. And I had to look up that the book was written in 2018 because after what we all went through in 2020, it felt very similar. It was something that came from China, in this case, as a result of, I think, kind of like over-industrialization within factories and manufacturing and things like that in China. A lot of the stuff that happens in the book with people wearing masks, with social isolation, with people fleeing the city, like all that stuff was very 2020. but this book was written in 2018. So in that sense, I think it was really interesting. Well, I saw this book described as being a pandemic novel that was about the millennial experience, okay? And I sit here in front of you as someone who would rank as an older millennial or an elder millennial, or I don't know, whatever they're calling us to make us seem like super old. And I could see where it was going. Our main character is Candace. Candace is very, very isolated. She lives in New York City. She has a boyfriend who she doesn't seem to like that much. She doesn't have a lot of friends anymore. Her friend group has kind of scattered and drifted away, and she exists. She goes to work. She goes home. She goes to work. She comes home. It's so bad that, in fact, when the city empties out, that it takes Candace a very long time to even notice that that is going on. So it was very much a satire and a social commentary, more than it was a novel that was seriously interested in talking about whatever this fungal flu was. People that are infected within the book, it's actually like really interesting. They become zombies, but they're like the least threatening zombies imaginable. Like, they basically become zombies and they just repeat things that they did every day in their real life. So if you worked in a clothing store, you might just spend, when you're a zombie, you're going to spend all your time just folding shirts over and over again, folding shirts. And again, I think that's meant to be a commentary on our lives and the way that we're ruled by routine and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I think that stuff was interesting. I don't know if it hit for me as hard as maybe it could have, but mostly I think that I was frustrated because I don't know why every single book that is about a plague or a pandemic or some kind of post-apocalyptic thing has to be like jammed up with some kind of weird religious cult stuff. I don't know, like, I didn't get into a religious cult in 2020 when that was going on, and I don't know that I feel like that's the way the story always has to go. I mean, it doesn't always. There are some that don't, but it just feels like it's too easy for us to just go straight to religious cult. You know, it's kind of like, I think about the book, The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, which I know is very beloved by people. And I liked it, except I didn't like the religion that the main character was creating within the book. Like, that did not hit for me at all. And I was like, why am I reading about this? I'm interested in what's going on in the world, which was not the story the author wanted to tell, obviously. But anyway, so there is a fair amount of like culty, in this case, a Christian cult that Candace falls in with after she leaves the city. And that stuff did not work for me. But at the same time, I did have an emotional reaction to this. And I think maybe for those of us, you know, all of us lived through 2020, and I don't know if I'm ready to read books about this yet. I think it just brings back a lot of stuff. So I gave it a 3.5. I rounded it up to 4 because I do think it's a good book and I think it's interesting. It's not very long. So if you are interested in, you know, the idea of reading a more literary book about a pandemic, and if you're interested in this idea of this commentary on millennials and millennial separation and our routines and all that kind of stuff, I think that's interesting too. Didn't totally gel for me, but I still think it's a good book, so 3.5 stars. And after I read Severance, I feel like that kind of like cured my my burgeoning reading slump. Or so I thought. Because then I got to the other thing that slowed my reading to a crawl this month, and I'm gonna give a warning that I am about to head into unpopular opinion land with this one, okay? So I, for the second time, tried to read The Will of the Many by James Islington. So I had tried to read this back in December, and I DNF'd it, I think at about like 15%, because there were just a lot of things frustrating me about it. But I thought maybe it was just because I had tried to read 2 fantasies in a row, and maybe that was just not the right time. So I have kept it on my possible TBR, and I decided that I was going to pick it up and try to get all the way through it this month. And yeah, no, I did make it further. I started again at the beginning because I did not trust that I remembered everything that I would have needed to. And I made it to about 40% of the book, and I DNF'd it again. And I'm going to explain to you why this book did not work for me. just so that you can have a little bit of an alternative perspective. This book is super popular, and there are so many 5-star ratings from people whose opinions I trust, so I kind of feel like this might be a me thing. But if you have the same unpopular opinions as me, maybe it might help you to know why I didn't like it, because I didn't really like it. I think the first thing is that our main character, his name is Viz, and first of all, why do male fantasy characters always have like a 3-letter name? I feel like that's a thing. But that's whatever. That's not what I'm mad about. We find him at the beginning of the book. He is working in a prison where people are basically brought when they have done something wrong to have their will extracted by force as a punishment. In this book, will as a concept is something that it's kind of like people describe it as a pyramid scheme. So the people on the bottom are donating their will, or I think part of their energy or their life force, to people higher up on the pyramid than them. And so he's working in a prison for people who are being punished that way. And we meet somebody who comes to the prison who insists that they wake one of the prisoners up so that he can ask him a question. And that part was really intriguing. It's a great beginning to a book. Then we follow our main character, Viz, as he goes to some illegal fights, kind of a gladiator style situation in this room-inspired fantasy. And he, of course, wins. He's the best at everything, in case you can't tell where I'm going with this thing that I don't like. Basically, our main character is good at everything. He might have trouble with something for like 2 pages, but then there's going to be a training montage and he's going to get better, and he is amazing. All these people who've been trained forever in the system and martial arts, he does end up going to this like it's not magical, to this like training academy for the elite of the world. And amazingly, he's going to be better than everyone else there too. It was just really frustrating. And it was frustrating because I was inside of his head the entire time, because this book is set in the first person. I don't love first person. It's first person present, which I love even less. And if I found one thing in fantasy that's probably a consistent issue with me, it's that I consistently don't like books that have first person present tense. I'm sure there's a way you could do that I wouldn't be mad, but it was not this. And I was just so frustrated by how perfect he was. I wanted to know more about the world. I wanted to know more about other people. I wanted to get different viewpoints than just his. And so at 40%, I just said, you know what? I am not making any progress on this book. I am so frustrated with it. I'm just going to put it away and say I gave it a good try. So this one, I didn't finish it, so it's probably not fair of me to rate it, but the part I did read, I mean, I was coming out at about a 2.5, 2-star, somewhere in there. It just did not work for me. So if you didn't like this book, you're not alone. And if you did like this book, don't be offended. I think it had a lot of things that were on my personal list of things that I dislike in a book. So there's that one. Okay, so I am now done with unpopular opinion time, and I'm going to move on to my favorite book of the month. This was really not on my bingo card for this month, that it was going to be my favorite thing that I read, and that is You Should Be So Lucky by Sebastian. This is This is a romance novel, and it is set in the 1960s, and it is about a reporter who is doing a series of articles on a baseball player in this fake New York professional baseball team called the Robins. So the baseball player, his name is Eddie. The reporter, his name is Mark. This was 5 stars for me. I loved it. And I am real picky with romance. I have to care about the characters. I have to feel like everything in it is earned. I have to feel like it's not too easy. This was, if we want to talk in romance tropes, this was a slow burn. So they don't get together until quite a long way into the book. There's a lot of them getting to know each other and be friends. There's a lot of conversation, and that's really kind of exactly where I like. Spice level, I would say, I would put it maybe at like a 2.5 chili pepper rating. It wasn't super spicy and it wasn't super explicit, but it did have spice in it. I was so invested in their love story. And what I really liked about it was how it discussed what it would have been like to be someone in this situation in the 1960s. So when you're setting a romance novel in a period where you have characters who at that time would not have been able to express who they were or, you know, their feelings for one another and things like that, I sometimes struggle if a book just kind of like ignores that, because that's not, I understand sometimes, you know, you want it to be happy, but also, you know, they would have had barriers that they had to overcome in this story, and nothing about this is unrealistic, which is what I really liked. Mark, our reporter here, he has suffered a loss. He has a partner who had passed away very young, and he is grieving, and he keeps himself away from other people because of that. Eddie, our baseball player, is just like the most golden retriever of a man that you can possibly imagine. He is adorable and sweet, and yeah, I just really loved this book. It had a lot of serious stuff in it. I cried like 5 times. It was an emotional read. I would say on the Emily Henry level of emotional reads. I just really loved it. So if you think that's something you might be interested in, I don't like sports. I don't care about sports, but I actually kind of care about the baseball and all the baseball metaphors, and that's how good this was. So this was my 5-star read for the month. Highest recommendation. You should check it out. Okay, I have one more book that I read this month, and it's one that's been on my TBR for a super long time, and that is As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. So this book is set in Syria. Our main character is Salama. I really hope I'm not going to say names wrong. I didn't listen to the audiobook. If I say a name wrong, I apologize a lot. She lives with her sister-in-law, Layla, and she finds herself, even though she was a pharmacy student before the war, she finds herself being pressed into service as a surgeon because she has more medical training, even at 18, 19 years old, than anybody else who's left. So this is a book that's going to really bring home the horrors of war, particularly the horrors of people, including a lot of children, who are horribly injured and many of whom do not survive. This is a hard book to review. It is a young adult book. There is a love story within the book. I did think that the love story was a little bit more of a focus than I thought it was going to be going in, and I wish that it had focused a little bit less on that. But having said that, the story of the people of Syria and everything that they were going through, the story of war and love for your country and not wanting to leave your country even though everything is terrible. It's a beautiful story. It's beautiful, it's important, it's worth reading. If you haven't read this one, I know it's been super popular for a few years. I would definitely recommend checking it out. I gave it about a 4-star, just really enjoyed it, and don't know how to review it exactly, but I would definitely recommend you check this one out. And there you have it. That is all the books that I read in the month of July. I had a great reading month. I am looking forward to August. I'm hoping I didn't pick any books that are going to slow my reading down the way that I did this month, but I'm pretty happy with a lot of the books that I read, and I am especially glad that I found Cat Sebastian as an author. I know they have another earlier romance that I'm definitely going to be picking up soon, because in spite of how cute this cover is, this was a hard-hitting romance, and I would definitely recommend it. And yeah, I hope that you have enjoyed watching me ramble on about all the books that I read this month. Please consider subscribing. If you're new here, please leave a comment. Let me know what your favorite read was in the month of July. I would love to hear about it and get some recommendations. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye.